a general welcome to everybody who is here tonight. It's now 6 p.m., which is the start time for our program, which means that we're going to wait for our other panelists to show up. In the meantime, though, I'm going to start with an introduction to this evening's program. This is not a formal debate. It's a structured, moderated discussion of Prop 414, the city sales tax half a percent, half-cent sales tax increase that'll be on the ballot. It's a mail-only election this year, well, as it is every year for city elections. So this is going to be dropping in your mailboxes probably today or tomorrow, the next day. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a pre-approved format that we've ran by both sides. We're going to have 10-minute opening statements, and that for April, since she's the sole advocate on the no side this evening, will extend to 20 minutes so that we make sure that everybody has equal time. If you don't want to fill it, April, you don't have to. And then we'll have 5-minute rebuttals. Then we'll have 2 crossing questions between the sides so that they can pose questions to each other. Finally, there'll be an unstructured discussion between the panelists to discuss whatever they might like to discuss, issues that have arisen during the opening statements, rebuttals and questions. Finally, we'll be going to questions time, and that'll be beginning with moderator questions. Myself and Joe may have questions for the panelists, followed by any journalists who are present, and then, of course, you can ask questions to the panelists as well. We have 2 hours slated for this evening. We don't have to use all of it. We may not use all of it. Hopefully, we won't use all of it. And then once we're done with all the questions or we've exhausted our time, we'll have 5-minute closings from both sides. So that's how tonight is structured. The main point is to just give everybody equal time and to have time and space to chew over this issue as thoroughly as possible to get all your questions answered and to get as much good information out there about this proposal as possible. As a moderated discussion, I feel it's incumbent upon me to, as moderator, to call out things like logical fallacies like ad hominem attacks or appeals to authority. They really have no place in a reasoned discussion. So, you can count on me to try and call those out if those happen. I hope they don't happen. Hello, everybody. Welcome, Regina. Welcome, Lane. Welcome, April. I'm going to give you guys a minute or two to introduce yourselves. Let's go with April first. Say hi, April, and give us your CV, your bona fides.
Okay, hi, I'm April Putney. I am a community member. I was born in Tucson, lived here basically my whole life. Right now I'm in school, getting a master's in urban planning from the U of A and CAPLA. Yep, that's me in a nutshell. Right now I am part of Against No Prop 414 coalition of mutual aid organizations, labor, tenants unions, and political organizations. We're a leftist coalition, grassroots, that are organizing against this ballot issue. So,
well, thank you so much for joining us, April. It's difficult in a democratic space to take a position against Prop 414 since there's so much authority on one side, the yes side, urging its passage. Mayor Romero, would you like to briefly introduce yourself?
Yes.
I think everybody knows you, but
I'm Regina Romero. I'm the mayor of Tucson, and I have been in public service in one way, shape, or form for the last 25 years. I started working in different campaigns for Democrats since I was 20, and actually it's been more than 30 years that I've been doing either volunteer work at campaigns for different candidates in our community and serving in different positions, working with Pima County government for 10 years, 5 of those with youth employment programs, putting kids to work, another 5 of those doing neighborhood reinvestment. And then I started working Ward 3. I worked there for about 2 years when Councilmember Karen Ulick first got elected in 2005 and then ran for council in 2007, served as a council member for 12 years, and ran for mayor in 2019. And I think I'm going on my 6th year now, a 7th year. So I have more than 30 years of public service under my belt in one way, shape, or form. And I love my job. I love serving as your mayor, and I'm excited to be able to have this conversation with you all.
Thank you, Mayor. Lane, Santa Cruz, Council Member Santa Cruz, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, yes, buenas tardes, buenas noches, good evening. My name is Lane Santa Cruz. I am the Ward 1 council member, also serving as vice mayor. I am born and raised here in Tucson. My parents migrated from pueblos in Sonora and Chihuahua to the west side and then ended up on the south side. I went to Desert View High School. I left Tucson on a tennis scholarship in Birmingham, Alabama, returned in 2004 to the University of Arizona, where I got politicized around the early immigrant rights movement that was happening at the time. So when Mayor Romero first got elected in 2007 into her position as a Ward 1 City Council member and asked me to join her, I was hesitant because I told her that I was an activist and an organizer, and people like me don't work in public office, that we protest and organize against elected officials. And she taught me my first lesson of how important it is to be a bridge between our community, especially around organizing activist circles, our working class families, and making sure that we're centering and prioritizing those issues in the public policy realm. I worked for her for a couple of years. My trajectory was always to do education. I have a PhD from the University of Arizona in teaching language and social cultural studies. My work there focused on decolonizing education, a lot of prevention work, a lot of culturally relevant curriculum. Some of y'all know I've shared before, I had my older brother in 2016 die from an accidental fentanyl overdose. And that was a moment for me, a gut check that our policies, the way that we show up for community, is failing us. And I couldn't even save my brother. I was being asked and called to do more. So I ran for office in 2019 and then got reelected in 2023. And it's also been an honor to be of service and work alongside Mayor Romero to be those problem solvers, those bridges back to our community. So thank you so much for having us.
Thank you, Council Member and Vice Mayor Santa Cruz. Now, at this time, we're going to do opening statements. With April's permission, I'm going to let the yes side go first so that she will get equal time to the time taken by Lane and Regina. So is that okay with you, April? Great. All right. So we have a time maximum of 10 minutes. Take as long as you need, and hopefully no longer. And I will give equal time to April, depending on how much time Lane and Regina take. Which of you would like to start?
So back in, I believe, 2014, 2015, I'm going to get my dates a little confused, and I should have double checked with the mayor because I wasn't working with the city at the time. We had Proposition 101 that went to the voters, and that proposition included 60% of that funding going to police and fire and 40% to our roads. I remember at the time also having hesitation of why we would have a proposition that would put transportation and public safety into a package in front of the voters. That proposition passed. And that's how we paid for a lot of, the upgrading of our buildings, some of the new stations that needed to get built. Also helped pave a lot of our arterial roads, some of our neighborhood residential streets. But as that proposition came to an end, we heard a lot of frustration from a lot of our residents on the conditions of neighborhood streets and how they were still failing. In 2021, my office knocked on 10,000 doors in Ward 1, and the number one issue that folks had was the condition of their neighborhood streets. So when we were discussing, the Prop 101 sunsetting and what that was going to look like moving forward, I advocated with mayor and council that we use the entirety of that proposition to only go for roads, so to fix residential streets. And so as you all know, that passed with over 70% of the voters approving it, so that over the next 10 years, every neighborhood street would get repaid. And another percentage of that pot would go to safety related to safer crosswalkings, lighting, speed humps, speed mitigation that would make people feel safer on the streets. Part of that also came with the truth in taxation, where we committed to our public safety that we would continue through our general fund to provide funding for the continuation of these capital investments, continuing to replace vehicles, the technology, and that's what we've been doing for the past 5 years. As we all know, that Governor Ducey's parting gift to municipalities like the city was to have a flat tax where we lessen the burden on the wealthiest corporations in the state of Arizona and put it on municipalities to shoulder that burden and figure out how to pay for it. And so over the next decade, we will lose hundreds of millions of dollars that we would have used to invest in these capital projects. And so as we our position, our role is to be problem solvers. And so we're taking the community need, the department needs, and this is a proposition that we came forward so that we can not only continue to meet those needs, and I guess I should also point out that as we were thinking about public safety, it wasn't just going to be police and fire. We wanted to make sure that as we're looking at public safety, it's a holistic approach with all the other services that we created during the pandemic, to include Housing First, to include community safety officers, to include care coordinators, social workers, some of these other gaps that we saw in our community that needed to be addressed. So moving more into, when we are talking about public safety, that is a more holistic approach. So I'll leave it at that in case Mayor Romero has more that she would like to include.
You know, it's unfortunate that the flat tax, which is one of the most regressive actions that Doug Ducey and the Republicans in the state legislature passed, really is affecting municipalities around the state. And we started seeing the possibility of losing millions and millions of dollars last year. And based on extensive input from the community, including Vice Mayor Santa Cruz's door-to-door, 10,000 door surveying, our very own surveying that we do through the city of Tucson. And of course, I went through an election both in 2019 and 2023, and we knocked on thousands of doors based on community input, budgeting processes. We put together what city of Tucson residents want us to invest in. We had a lot of success passing Proposition 411 to take care of our roads, but we were looking at the needs that Tucsonans have told us they have and what we need to invest in. That's affordable housing, that is low barrier shelter, that is infrastructure for community safety. We created Housing First, we created Community Safety, Health, and Wellness. And with federal funds, we had been investing in youth employment, in workforce development, and in preschool funding. And you know, we were planning on growing those programs, but unfortunately the flat tax hit us. And there's a few ways that cities can fund their needs. One of the main ones that we have left are sales taxes. And we don't have property taxes. Of all of our budget or general funds, $18 million is generated by property taxes. And according to state law, only counties can charge primary property taxes in order to be able to cover their expenses. And so we want to continue investing in programs that improve the safety and quality of life of Tucsonans. And our hands have been tied by Republicans in the state legislature and our previous governor that really, as we all know, started cutting taxes to corporations and millionaires in our state. So now more than ever, we feel that we need to invest in ourselves. With the new Trump administration, we saw last week what the possibilities are in terms of any type of investment from the federal government. We were lucky as a community that the Biden-Harris administration really, sent Tucson millions and millions of dollars. But the Trump administration is not only not going to help us, they are going to take from us. So programs like HUD and HOME and CDBG are all federal funds that are sent to cities directly that are in danger. $100 million alone of housing money, affordable housing money, is in danger of being lost under a Trump administration. So we need to invest in ourselves, and this is one way that we can do it. And I just want to remind people, especially those that say that this is a regressive tax. In the city of Tucson, for generations, we have decided not to tax rental, not to have a rental tax, and not to have a food tax, which are one of the biggest expenses of working families and that working families have. Another expense and a big expense is transportation. And the city of Tucson and mayor and council have decided to make our transit system free. And that has been free for the last 4 years. And so rental tax and food taxes do not exist in the city of Tucson. And those are the biggest chunks of allocations that working families have to make. And so this will be a minor contribution that working families have to make into making our city more safe and more vibrant and have a better quality of life for all of us.
So it was spoken of that this is a regressive tax, which No on 414 is definitely on board with. We feel that because it is a regressive tax, most of the tax needs to go to programs and services that directly support the people who will be most affected by it, the poor and the working class families that we were just talking about. So understanding that there's a limited amount of ways that cities can recoup costs at this particular moment in time when inflation is hurting working families, when housing costs are through the roof, pun kind of intended, I guess, people are really struggling to stay in their homes. And it seems to us that many of the people who are showing the most support for this tax are not in positions to be particularly affected by those very slim margins to stay in your rental that has increased. I think the housing affordability strategy quotes between 2017 and 2021, the cost of renting has increased like 40%, perhaps. And I can pull that up if I need to double check myself. So this regressive tax will definitely hurt the poor the most. And that is one of our main concerns, is that if it will hurt the poor the most of the tax budget should go to programs and services that help support people, keep them in their homes, do the things that Mayor and our council member Santa Cruz mentioned are the things that are beneficial. However, looking at the budget line item by line item, and if you add up each thing, around 50% of this budget will directly support policing, which is not necessarily something that helps keep the most poor and marginalized people in our communities safe, really. The people who are going to be hurt the most by this tax financially are also going to probably be the ones who are over-policed already and will continue to be so with the surveillance investments that are in the line items of this budget. So just taking into account who stands to lose the most based on this tax budget structure, that's one of the most important things that we think can be communicated about this tax. Additionally to Tucson struggling because of prices and the added burden, it doesn't really reflect community priorities in the way that has been communicated necessarily by the city. I've looked over the budget engagement feedback data that I requested from City of Tucson. And when it comes to mentions of policing for that budget engagement survey, 88 distinct individuals mentioned the word policing. 61% of those individuals were against allocating increased funding to policing. 33% were pro-traditional policing, and there was 5 or 6% that seemed ambivalent. Additionally, it has been communicated, I think on the August 27th mayor and council memo, that yes, the budget engagement survey and other budget public participations have been included in the decision-making for this specific tax budget allocations. They've also relied on Plan Tucson data. However, looking over the first draft of Plan Tucson and being very involved with that as a community member volunteering, I haven't seen anything within Plan Tucson to point to Tucsonans asking for increased policing and surveillance. So when you look at the public engagement done specific to this project of introducing a tax onto the ballot, in addition to the thousands of points of data that has been gathered from the Plan Tucson team, who've done a great job, in my opinion, as somebody who studies this in school and a participant, nothing points necessarily to that disproportionate funding for policing and specifically for surveillance. So we consider that the regressive tax will be harmful to people, and it will do more harm than good to vulnerable and marginalized people. So that's why we formed a coalition against it. We think that many of the budget line items in this are actually quite good. We agree that the data-based strategies that mayor and council talk about in the community safety, health, and wellness, and also undergirded by HCD efforts and navigators and outreach, we believe those programs are actually very beneficial, but they are not traditional policing, and they actually rely most on the efforts of community members, nonprofits, and housing and community development to reach those very important goals of reduced gun violence. So we see this tax as egregious spending on TPD and surveillance. We do not think that it's justified by any public engagement. And we don't think that it will actually support the people that it seeks to support. And like I said, we don't oppose all of the expenses. We just would like to see a better plan that does not harm the most vulnerable and marginalized people while taxing them and asking them to pay for the surveillance that will be used against them. Coming into a Trump era where there are no necessary legal protections that keep TPD from partnering with ICE and Border Patrol, we're already seeing deportation efforts on the South Side and around town. So we are very aware of the possibility that these technologies can be misused. Lastly, it is true that the state flat tax takes monies away, and also that the federal government austerity takes monies away. However, it has been a very long, many years of underfunding HCD and other beneficial city programs with the general fund. Many coalition organizations have been asking for years for these programs to be better funded, and just having the federal monies taken away means we have to be even more targeted with what we are doing with our own money at this point. We have to be very, very careful with it and do things that really do support without harming the most people because of the austerity that we're going to be facing. So that is just our position in a nutshell. Thank you.
With time to spare, thank you, April. I will give you the option to go first or second for rebuttals. April, would you prefer to go first for rebuttal or second?
I feel like we could switch back and forth. That would be fine.
Okay. Regina and Lane, would you like to take a few minutes for rebuttal of what April said?
I can jump first, Vice Mayor. A couple of things. The possibility of losing $100 million from the Trump administration, and this would affect Housing and Community Development Department alone, there is nowhere in our budget that we can find $100 million that are at risk because of the Trump administration's desire to undo and freeze grants to communities across the nation. So with the austerity measures and the grant freezes that the Trump administration had suggested in his first week in office, the work that we've done, it really would affect housing community development to the tune of about $100 million. And the second piece that I'd like to clarify is that even though April might have looked at whatever she did, I don't know exactly what background material she has read. The city of Tucson has done extensive engagement with the community, not just Plan Tucson, not just us individually going out and knocking on doors, thousands and thousands of doors in our community, but it includes surveys, it includes different budget town halls that we've done throughout the year. And so people, wherever they are, whether they're low income or at the top of the rate, people want to call 911 and they want a response. This mayor and council, through my leadership and my colleagues on the council, were the ones that never ever existed before. Housing First never existed in the city of Tucson before. The housing affordability strategy for Tucson never existed before this mayor and council. Community safety, health, and wellness, I pushed to create that program with my colleagues. So we are looking at community safety, as the vice mayor said at the beginning, in a very holistic way. Our charter demands that we fund police and fire, that we fund parks, and that we fund transit and transportation. It is something that we have to provide to the residents of Tucson based on the Constitution voted by the people of Tucson. So it is a responsibility for us to provide police and fire for our community. Those departments cost a lot of money. A fire apparatus, a fire truck costs $1 million. And people want to call our 911 system and they want to make sure that the technology is available and is working in order for us to be able to connect them to the services that they deserve. And so the technology that we are investing in is also 911 phones, etc. They have not been updated in the last 20 years. We have some vehicles in police and fire that are old and not working. All of the technology that we are investing in already exists. So I'm not sure what April means when she talks about surveillance, but all of the technology that we are investing in already exists. Pima County has a plane. We have helicopters already. And we are already, all of the technology that we have is being used right now. And so none of it is to spy on people or to surveil people. It is already a service that we provide. Many of the technology is newer technology. For example, the plane that we want to invest in can help with street racing, something that neighborhoods throughout our community are concerned about and are dangerous. And so we need funds to be able to invest in the programs that have taken some of the responsibilities off the shoulders of our police officers. We created the community safety officer position. When I first started as mayor, we had 5 community safety officers. Now we have 130. These are unarmed officers that go to neighborhood meetings, that take care of our parks, that make sure that when a person gets into an accident, they show up. They
5 minutes for your
help.
rebuttal, Mayor.
And so,
if you'd like to continue, it'll take away from Lane's time.
All right, Elaine, do you have anything to add?
Sorry, I didn't realize I was unmuted. Sorry if there's been background noise. Apologies for that.
I would have muted you if there was.
Okay. Thank you, Mayor Romero. I think I agree with everything the mayor just said, and I also don't disagree with what April said, and I think that ideologically very aligned with April. I believe that we should all be fighting and working for a world where we're abolitionists and we have different ways to care for our community. But the reality is that in this moment, it's also having an understanding of where the general public is, and it's not necessarily there. So my responsibility as an elected, it's not about being right or being ideologically aligned. It's about being effective and making sure that we're protecting and showing up for our working families. So going back to what Mayor Romero was saying, the work that we have been doing is changing the material conditions of our working and our poorest families. And by having fare free transit is making sure that the poorest in our community have the extra money that they need to pay for medicine, to pay for food, to pay for rent. That is one less burden that they have to deal with. By having housing first, by minimizing the barriers that people have to navigate to get into housing, is a real material condition shift in the city of Tucson. By having care coordinators, these social workers have been such a game changer when people are coming to our offices, getting evicted, and us being able to connect them with somebody that can walk them through the process of making sure that they have stable housing. Or when we have somebody having a mental health breakdown, that instead of sending police to do welfare checks, we have care coordinators who are trained to support people in moments of crisis. So I think where we're at is the progress that we have done in shifting the narrative in our community. And at the end of the day, it's a messaging thing. So we have to be able to prove that we have an alternative for how we can show up, but it's also the messaging on how we do that. I was having a very disheartening conversation earlier today about how people feel about our immigrant communities and all the polling that has taken place. And this is also around policing. There's been a lot of polling on policing and how Black and Latinos feel about it. And even though Black and Latino families have had bad experiences with policing, they do not support anything but funding police. And so we have long-term work to do to get people to shift their idea of, like, when they call 911, they want police, because maybe police is not the right answer, but we're not there at this moment. And so anyway, going back to the disheartening conversation today, that right now, as we're doing polling around how Americans feel about deportations, that close to 60 to 70% of people in this country, Republican or Democrat, support deportations. That is heartbreaking to hear, because we have lost the messaging around immigration and immigrants and what they mean to this community. But also, we've done a poor job, even as a Democratic Party, of providing alternative solutions for how we protect our immigrant communities or how we provide legal pathways to citizenship. So we have a lot of work to do. And I feel like at the end of the day, this isn't disagreement about the challenges or the concerns that April is raising, but just like she mentioned that the people supporting will not be hurt by the proposition, I would argue that the people in opposition are the ones that will not be hurt by this proposition. So you can have the Metro Chamber, the Tucson Association of Realtors, the Southern Arizona Leadership Council, Jim Click, some of the wealthiest players in this community being against it because it does provide those safety nets and they think the general fund should all go to police and fire is an issue. And I think for a lot of us who are highly educated, who can talk about abolition work, who can, talk about socialism, we also probably will not be as hurt by it. But the people, working class people, our working poor will be impacted if we don't have a way to lessen the burdens that they already face.
I'm just going to interject real quickly here that, while I appreciate what Lane said about some of the people who are opposing this measure, possibly being the ones who would be least hurt by it, I don't think April is among those people. So I think that might be a little unfairly ad hominem in this case. But you have a minute left. If Regina, you want to take that last minute to finish up your thought on your rebuttal?
Yeah, Michael, nobody is saying that April is not being hurt by this. We are saying the people that are against this easily say that they are worried about working families and the working poor,
Sure.
but are very ready to give thousands and thousands of dollars.
Absolutely, I hear you, but it's not
Trump,
really the
right.
It's not really the democratic discussion that we're having here. April isn't representing that
these
viewpoint.
are the people that are against it, right? They are readily
They're
giving
amongst them,
Trump and readily giving to people like Cisco Mani that are voting against working families in our community. So
Sure.
Just today, we found out that Turning Point Action, the co-founder is Charlie Kirk, is jumping in on the No campaign. And then just to add people that are supporting this initiative. The initiative is being supported by all of mayor and council. We have our state legislators, Senator Sandershan. We have many individuals in our community, OPCS, which is O Pueblo Community Services, many in the affordable housing community. We have Natalie Luna Rose, we have Dr. Ravi Shah, we have Jennifer Ekstrom, Adelita Grijalva, people that understand intimately what the state legislature, the Republican-led state legislature, and the Trump administration can do to cities like Tucson and throughout the country. And lastly, I think it's important to say that many of the groups that are talking about how worried they are about the working poor that support Trump and other Republicans that are at the ready to dismantle our public education systems and dismantle programs that help for affordable housing, are also advocating for a sales tax for the RTA next. That is not a regressive sales tax when they want to build the roads. By the way, I have sat on the RTA board for the last 5 years, and many of the money that Tucsonans are charged goes to unincorporated areas where we do not see the investment in return. So I'm just saying that let's keep it real and ask more questions about why Republicans like Jim Click and Turning Point Action USA are investing on the No campaign.
Sure. I just want to remind you that the reason why we're doing this in DGT specifically is to elevate the oppositional voices to Prop 414 amongst Democrats. So in the future, if you could, refrain from referring to people who aren't here and imputing their motives, because April is here. So
I would never imagine that you defend Jim Click and Turning
No,
Point
no,
actually
I
recommended.
wouldn't, but I would defend April. She's not representing those people. She's representing a democratic progressive viewpoint against the problem.
And nobody is accusing April of representing those people.
Good. I just want to make sure that's very clear. April, I'll give you 10 minutes in rebuttal to anything that Mayor Romero and Vice Mayor Santa Cruz have said so thus far.
Okay, thank you. Am I audible?
You are.
Excellent. It is a strange place to find yourself as what some people might consider a radical leftist, kind of on the same weird dovetailing side with groups like the Tucson Crime Free Coalition or the Metro City Chamber of Commerce. I gotta say, and when I mentioned that to a reporter, they said, politics makes strange bedfellows. And I have to just acknowledge that that's true. So, right, we're looking at HCD being starved for resources,
Could you
right?
clarify what HBC is?
Oh, so sorry. Yeah, the Housing and
acronym?
Community Development Department.
Thank you.
They do most of our development work, including with their development arm, nonprofit El Pueblo, I think they're called. So they do a lot of great work in the community, right, for housing, which, as we all know, probably in this call, it's indisputable we're in a housing crisis. If anybody read the recent TPCH report, sorry, how to quickly describe this. So HUD funding comes through for homeless services, what's called a continuum of care. And this is a geographical area, and ours is TPCH, the Tucson Pima Collaboration in Homelessness. So recently they released their gaps analysis, and it is a pretty stark, I believe they said that 72% of households, not just individuals, but households who reach out to the system for help because they're experiencing housing precarity or potentially already unsheltered homelessness, 72% cannot be helped within the Tucson Pima continuum of care area. So that's just an example of how stark and dire the housing crisis is. We would like to see more specific targeted investment in these upstream solutions to public safety and crime, right? If you're on the streets, you're going to be criminalized just based on laws. You're going to be trespassing. You're going to be in parks past the closing time. You're going to be having a terrible time in public health. You're not going to be able to take showers. You're not going to be employable, right? We want to solve the housing crisis. And we need very specific, much more targeted efforts than meets the needs currently, even with that federal funding. And with the threat of that federal funding being taken away, we need to be even more specifically targeted to these solutions. So when you're telling me like, oh, it's fine that half of this will go to policing, it's really not, because the need of the moment is so great, greater than it arguably has been in 100 years. And added policing and surveillance will not solve this problem. It will hurt the people already on the streets the most. What engagement data was I talking about? Literally just that was published in mayor and city council memos in CFO Anna Rosenberry's memo on May 7th, I think. In just the basic communications that the city is putting into the public domain. All the things you are communicating about Prop 414 are the things that I'm reading. So if you're telling us that actually the people of Tucson really do support policing, I haven't been able to find that data communicated by the city anywhere so far. And believe me, I have been looking. So if it's happening in person, verbally during town halls, it would be great to have that on public record. I would love to see that. Additionally, we love a lot of the programs that y'all have created, honestly, like the cashew and those specific kind of policing adjacent. I don't know why they're even involved in them, but those community interventions, we love them. We don't know why they're so underfunded compared to other traditional harmful, arguably, policing initiatives. I'm looking at the budget line items now. $6 million a year for patrol vehicles, $2.7 million a year for non-patrol vehicles, for a total of $8.7 million a year projected, right? Because these are going to be broken down by percentages. Projected $8.7 million a year garnered from this regressive tax towards police vehicles, patrol and non-patrol. Looking over into another bucket, as Mayor Romero mentioned, we want people to be able to call 911 and get an answer. Only 800,000 for 911 services. Obviously, that works together with other things. But here we are over in the neighborhood and community resilience category. And I'm looking over here and it's 1 million for investments in CBVI, 600,000 for community safety staffing, office and violence prevention, $300,000 a year. I love these programs that you're mentioning, that you're touting as these really great solutions, and we agree. Those solutions are the great solutions, but why are you not funding them with more purpose? Why are they not prioritized in this tax plan? And why am I seeing the CSARC IT technology support at $1.37 million a year, compared to only $1 million for workforce development, only $1 million for early childhood programs, only $1 million for youth workforce development, only $1 million for Somos Unos, only $1 million for Team Up to Clean Up? I mean, the list kind of goes on when you look at the way that this investment is made to heavily prioritize traditional policing, which is harmful to vulnerable communities. I don't think anybody here is really disputing that. Regardless of what people want when they call, oftentimes and statistically, vulnerable peoples are over-policed and targeted. So when I'm looking here at the CSARC IT technology support at 1.37 million and comparing it to Thrive Zone investments at 1 million, I don't know why you guys aren't putting more emphasis on these extremely beneficial community investment programs. When it comes over here to low barrier shelter and development, we love that. $950,000, wish it were more. Also, we wish that we didn't have to beg you for it on the September 11th, 2024 Mayor and Council public hearing. That money did not exist there until the community came out and just talked to Mayor and Council that entire public hearing. And then I remember Mayor Romero turned to City Manager's office and said, figure it out. So now, because of this coalition members' advocacy, now we have a line item for low barrier shelter that wasn't there before. So we would like to see specific targeted investment in these very beneficial programs that Councilmember Santa Cruz and Mayor Romero have been speaking of, and less in, you know, $16.7 million for air support modernization, including a plane or fixed wing aircraft, of which we have been borrowing Pima counties just fine this whole time. And it is, even according to the city site for Prop 414, fixed wing aircraft is one of surveillance support. The role of fixed wing aircraft is for surveillance. The CSARC camera situation is one of surveillance. You're right, these technologies do already exist in Tucson because we have a history of investing the most in policing and surveillance. I took the from fiscal year 2017 all the way to fiscal year 2025 data, and I put it in Excel and I created a trend line. Like I just used trend Excel, super easy if you have the education to do that. And we have increased our policing budget, not only from all adopted budgets, but specifically also in the general fund year over year, it's an increase. So mostly, yeah, we agree. All of these particular investments that you're talking about here, when you're not mentioning the police surveillance, we love those, you know, but these, like these that will harm people, actively coming into an era of Trump where we don't know where that camera surveillance technology is going to be used by whom and for what. We don't love that. And there are no legal protections that we can find to keep ICE and Border Patrol from accessing that data or from using facial recognition technology with that video camera data through CSARC that TPD gathers against protesters for human rights, against protesters who are protesting fascism, against protesters who are standing up for immigrant rights, or potentially against unhoused people who must live on the streets and cannot avoid public places where they will be subject to increased surveillance from cameras. As the city has mentioned, putting these in high crime areas, typically of low income folks. So
It's time. Thank you,
yeah,
April. Thank you,
that's all
April.
I've got to say.
So that was some great rebuttal. And I think you guys probably want to discuss that. And we have an open discussion period coming up. But right now, I'd like to ask the panelists if they have specific questions for the other side that they'd like the other side to answer. Anybody can speak up. Go ahead, April.
Are you guys like aware of, or have you considered, and this isn't an argumentative question, this is actually something we really want to know, but are you aware of and have you considered the potential for the surveillance technology funded in this tax to be used in a way that is inappropriate that you do not anticipate? I understand that none of you personally, and perhaps even Chief Kasmar, none of the people at the city intend for the misuse of technologies. But like, have you considered safeguards? Or are there limits that are set to how this technology funded through the Prop 414, if it passes, how those limits can be set, or what they will be?
It's a fair question. Whether you'd like to answer that.
I can jump in. We at the City of Tucson take very seriously the rights of individuals and the rights for privacy for individuals. And so none of this information can be requested by the City of Tucson from the federal government unless there are judicial orders. And so the information that we have is much more used for safety and security of our residents. And again, all of the technology that is being purchased with the Proposition 414 funds already exists. And not only exists in Tucson and Pima County, but throughout the state of Arizona. And it is safeguarded with all of the, power and support of the right to privacy in our country.
Lane, you like to add anything?
No, I think the other thing I would just add is that part of us having autonomy over how we fund it is to not be not have to share this kind of information. There's also lots of federal grants that allow cities to fund a lot of these technologies. And in the past, our PD department has been very intentional of not going after some of these grants to not have to be put in a position where they have to automatically have to share data with our federal departments.
Do either of you have a question that you'd like April to answer? No?
No, I would say that, and digging deep and being intimately involved with our budget since 2007, I have been on either the council or as mayor. Sometimes I question whether April or the No people understand the budget in terms of affordable housing and the funds that come in for affordable housing from HUD, Home, CDBG. And so I just want to understand where you're coming from in terms of understanding the budget, the general fund versus the grants and funds that the general budget supplements in terms of affordable housing, community safety, health and wellness, and
Yeah, that's a fair question.
our Housing First program.
do you really understand the full budget picture that the Tucson looks at when they look at all their funding sources that are going into public housing?
Do I have the same understanding as somebody paid 40 hours a week to do this for many years? Probably not. I do understand that affordable housing is very complicated to be built and typically relies on LIHTC funding, which is a tax credit that the IRS provides to wealthy investors. And often layered funding is required for affordable housing builds. That leaves a little bit of a gap that the city of Tucson or other municipalities have to make up. So my understanding of this single line item in this budget gap financing pool that will be funneled into the Tucson Housing Trust Fund, which was created but not funded because a bond didn't pass a while ago, which that's a great question I have for y'all after this is, why not a bond for housing? We can get into that, but understanding that it is quite difficult regarding funding affordable housing builds or development in general. And you have to use layers and you have to kind of incentivize developers to do this type of development. I'm pretty aware of all that based on my personal background and education. If the question is, why are we relying so heavily on these federal funding mechanisms when we could already hopefully have put more investment locally in place? That's a good question. I'd like that question to be answered. I looked at the general fund. I have a vague understanding of the revenue streams for that, probably not as deep an understanding of how we get our general fund money as Mayor Romero does. But just looking at the increases year over year, I don't understand why we haven't made more targeted investments with our own money to solve these issues that have been around for a long time. Granted, the housing crisis as a national crisis has really ramped up since the pandemic began. However, we always have had issues with poverty here. And looking at the general fund, I don't really understand why those resource allocations have been what they have been, especially when
as a specific question that Regina and Len can respond to.
Yeah, yeah, sure. I'll go back to my last question. So like, why not a housing bond? Like, I understand that housing bonds, bond money, right, can only be used with capital investments. However, it seems like a nice layered approach for funding housing, like when we're talking about reaching this gap to get affordable housing built and stuff. It seems like a nice paired approach might be a bond. And I understand that our bond level just got recently raised, so good for us. Our property values are doing so well, we get higher bond level. Unfortunately, we also have like 60% more people on the streets. So why could we not, or have you considered using a housing bond paired with reallocation of general funds to get those staffing and service needs met with a bond capital improvement infrastructure? And just to like add to that question,
well,
let's
just wait there and see what their answer is to that question.
Okay.
All right, I'll jump in. The mayor can clarify more of when we can go after a bond and when we can go after a sales tax. It seems like from listening to April that really the issue around this proposition is that they would have wished, or she would have wished, that it had been a housing bond and not a public safety, safe and vibrant city sales tax. That's what I'm hearing.
I'm kind of just wondering, were there less regressive avenues sought? What could those be that would not be as regressive and yet still target these very important things?
So what's interesting about the position that we're in, right? We're the very front-facing side of government. We almost shield our state and federal representatives because people come to their city council, and if they're seeing an impact in anything from the income taxes that they're paying, their property taxes or sales taxes, they come to us to show their frustration about it. I like to remind us, even with our sales tax and it being regressive, the state taxes us a lot more in our sales tax, and that doesn't all come back to the city. So I would argue two things, that it has been decades of disinvestment from the federal and our state government in our municipalities that have put us in this position. So this has been by design. This isn't something that's happened overnight or one crisis that created this. This has been very intentional. The next point is that we are trying to address like the needs of what we have at this moment with what we can do. And so I think the mayor right now can speak more about the sales tax and the bonding and when we can do that. I don't disagree with you, April, that what we need to be looking for and towards and more aggressively fighting for is having some kind of housing bond. But right now, this proposition that we're talking about is about public safety and trying to look at public safety in a more holistic way and trying to make sure that the programs we have put into place continue to be there as we look for more funding. Right now, we're trying to not lose progress in the work that we've done, as we know that we have a lot more work to do and that we would love to work with very intelligent, data-driven people like yourself to help us be part of that solution. And I will kick it over to the mayor so she can explain a little more about the sales tax and the bonding process.
Yeah, one of the ways that cities can accumulate funds for their general fund to pay for trash and parks and recreation, police, fire, and all of the supportive services that we have is through sales taxes. And that was something, it was not something that I chose or this council or maybe even 3-4 councils and mayors ago. This is something that is state law that the state many, many years ago decided the state is going to collect income tax, the counties are going to collect property taxes, and the cities are going to collect sales taxes. That's just the reality of the laws that we have. Unfortunately, because of a tax to working folks by Republicans in the state legislature and governors like Doug Ducey, they have eliminated the most progressive taxes that we have, which are income taxes. The city has nothing to do with income taxes.
Sure.
Republicans have decided to give wonderful deals to millionaires and corporations by putting together, by devising a flat tax that affects, to be honest with you, the working poor much more than it affects millionaires. It was a giveaway by Doug Ducey and Republicans in the state legislature, and they decided to do a flat tax. How does that affect us? Why do we keep talking about the Doug Ducey flat tax? Because in them doing so, it affected the money that flows into cities and towns like Tucson.
Sure.
And so because of that, we are going to receive millions and millions less every single year. The city of Tucson does not rely on property taxes. We have a secondary property tax. And from that secondary property tax, we collect about $18 million. Mm-hmm. That property tax we usually use for general obligation bonds. The general obligation bonds that the voters approved, I think it was back in 2017, which was Proposition 407. It was the parks and connectivity bonds that we're putting to use right now, is really much eating up the amount of money that we can use with general obligation bonds. The local jurisdiction that usually bonds much more are counties because they have a bigger property tax base that they can go out and bond much larger amounts to be able to pay for capital. It's usually capital improvements that general obligation bonds pay for. We wouldn't want to run a general obligation bond for the Safe and Vibrant Cities initiative, because you have to pay interest rates with general obligation bonds. So it costs you more to borrow from GO bonds. So that's the reason why the city of Tucson, our hands are kind of tied, because that's the only area that we can go after sales taxes. And I want to reiterate, it's not just the city of Tucson that is thinking about a sales tax in order to fill the holes that the state legislature has been leaving cities and towns across Arizona. Phoenix is considering one as well. And so, you know, as Democrats, I believe that we need to make sure that we're pushing back on the state legislature, and frankly, on groups like the ones that are saying to vote no on Prop 414, April not included, Southern Arizona Leadership Council, the Tucson Metro Chamber, the Realtors Association, and others, to push back on the decisions that are being made in the state legislature and in the federal government that are regressive and are affecting working families. And in order for us to be able to,
your answer
in order
to
for,
April's question.
let me finish my thought, please,
Sorry.
Michael.
Sure.
In order for us to be able to provide the quality of life and the services that by charter, by our constitution, we need to provide, we need to be able to ask voters, right? Voters decide. We need to be able to ask voters, do you want to invest in this issue?
So specifically,
Michael,
in answer to April's question, what I'm hearing is that our property tax expected revenues are maxed out for bonding. And so that's why we're not pursuing any bonding in this area.
I'm sorry?
That the property taxes that we do receive are already obligated for bonding, and so we don't have any additional bonding capacity.
We have very little
am I hearing that
capacity
right?
for bonding, very, very little capacity for bonding. And it is pretty much at capacity with the parks and connectivity bonds.
Does anybody have any further specific questions for either side? Otherwise, I'm going to just open it up for like general discussion between the panelists, and we can start taking questions.
I had a question.
Sure.
If this does, and if this doesn't pass, what are mayor and council's plans to continue working to get needs met that aren't going to be met by this rather small allocation for housing and shelter? What are the plans to
What happens if it doesn't
actually,
pass?
what are the plans to get these needs met, regardless of the outcome?
I'll jump in. I think we'll know better after the election what it is that we have to do with the money. We have to have a balanced budget at the end of every budget season. And so, yeah, like I have actually, Mayor, the bus fares have been free for 5 years. So it's like everything will have to, you know, be on the table of what is sustainable and what's not. And so I'd rather not speculate until after the election, and we're also in budget season, of what it is that we're going to have to cut back on.
Mayor?
That's a great question, to be honest with you. I think I think about it every time I look at the budget and at the programs that we have created that are proving results, you know, community safety, health and wellness, housing first, our violence interruption programming that we've instituted has brought down 80% of gun violence and crime in some areas of our community, and it's proven to work. It is a holistic way to provide safety to our community, outside of just police and fire. And so I too want to see what the result of the election is. But I do want to remind those that are with us right now that according to our Constitution, voter-approved charter, our responsibilities are police, fire, parks, and transportation. And so I've been through this before. I'm not a newbie at this. I got elected in November of 2007, and I entered into the Great Recession. I saw holes of $50–60 million per year in 2008, 2009, 2010. We're finally getting out of those holes. And so when you see deficits as big as $60 million a year, and with the possibility of Trump coming after very important funds that frankly he doesn't care about, funds for housing, funds for shelters, you know, with CDBG funds, with home funds, with HUD funds on the line, like I said, $100 million that are at risk with the Trump administration. Once you start losing the programs we've created the last 5 years, it'll take another 10–20 years to get out of the holes that are created by budget deficits and see any investment in those programs. And I just want to remind people that affordable housing and unsheltered homelessness is not the sole responsibility of cities. This is societal issues that have been created by decades of non-investment or underinvestment by every level of government. And so this is not an issue that cities can fix alone, right? Homelessness is a societal issue that has been ignored by the federal government, by the state government, by county governments, and I dare say the city governments. So this is too big of an issue to be able to say the city of Tucson can fix alone. It has to be done with every level of government, and all of us have to demand that of our federal partners, our state partners, as well as our county partners. But I've gone through those horrible budget seasons where we see $60 million deficits and we have to balance the budget, and we go without a lot of the work that we need to invest in.
I'm going to move to questions since we have about 45 minutes left. I want to leave plenty of time for the audience to get their questions in. So I'm going to be relying on Joe to condense and concisely state some of the questions that have been coming up in the chat. And of course, me and Joe may have questions. I'm going to take my privilege at this point to ask a specific question for anybody on the panel who wants to answer. And it's not clear to me from reading all the materials around this proposition, what happens if revenue projections are not met? How, if, for instance, there's a downturn in the business cycle, this is, sales tax is very sensitive to that. What happens? How is allocation changed if those revenue projections are not met? Is the first thing that are dropped is the annual outlays and not the capex? If those capital investments that are proposed, are they reduced proportionately? How does it work if we don't get as much money as we think we do?
I can jump in. In terms of the Proposition 414?
Yeah, specifically those monies that we're projecting X amount of dollars.
We're projecting about 80 million, approximately.
If we don't get that much in any particular year or overall, how are those allocations reduced? Are they reduced across the board completely proportionately? Are there things that are protected and spent on first, and then other things have to absorb the hit? How does that work?
Just like you're saying it, they're distributed according to the percentages allocated in the initiative. So everything is reduced proportionally according to the percentages disclosed to the community.
So what if in that first year, we don't get as much revenue as we expect? Would those capital expenditures that are proposed for things like new court programs, police vehicles, police aircraft, would those also be reduced?
They would all be reduced proportionally.
All right, thanks for that clarity. Joe, you want to jump in here and start giving us some questions from the chat room? And if people want to start raising their hands with using the react button now, if you want to ask your question live, you can get in the queue to do that now.
Didn't the state get rid of rental taxes?
Yes, fortunately, this mayor and council and previous mayor and councils have never believed in rental tax, because rental tax does affect, people that are living paycheck to paycheck. So the city of Tucson has never relied and has never had rental tax or food tax.
Okay.
But the state legislature did go after rental tax the previous session. And pretty much every city and town in Arizona was affected. We were not. And then this year they're going after the food tax. And again, every city in Arizona except Tucson will be affected by that.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. And aren't food taxes illegal statewide? Anyone want to jump on that one?
Food tax was permissible, and I believe this year the state legislature is wanting to remove food tax from being able to be used for cities and towns across Arizona.
So
but in the city of Tucson, we have never had a food tax or a rental tax.
Yeah. How much will the increased sales tax actually cost the average household?
It's very hard to it's very, very hard to be able to put that number together. But like I said, most working families, their biggest investment per month is rent or mortgage, and those are not taxed in the city of Tucson, and food. And that is not taxed in the city of Tucson. Another big expense that families have to make are transportation investment, like paying for a car. And again, as Vice Mayor said, the city of Tucson very specifically has kept transit free because we want to make sure that we are giving an opportunity for working families to not have to carry that transportation expense as well. But we can get back to the approximate amount that people will be investing.
Okay, one of our participants ran his numbers, his household's numbers, and he thinks that he spends about $2,000 per year on taxable items. So this tax will cost me $10 per year. Are those good numbers, Mayor?
Without seeing what he is looking at, that sounds correct. That it will be, pennies per week, that I would say, for families in Tucson. So I wouldn't be able to say, yes, that's the number, because we haven't ran those numbers ourselves.
Okay. Kind of another number, 9.2%. Will that be the total sales tax in Tucson if this proposition passes?
Yes.
Okay. And there was a little note on that. Probably most of us here can afford this tax, but I believe it will hurt the people that are poor, and also the high sales tax will be hard for consumers that are struggling. And I think we're all compassionate to that sentiment. What was the motivation behind the allocation to policing and surveillance? I understand that people want better police response times, but has there been any analysis as to why the response times are so poor? Okay, this is quite a long question. There long has been discussion about utilizing shelters for the unhoused, but specific sites for the shelters have not been determined. Please specify the locations, or must the city acquire land?
That might be a little too detailed for this particular discussion.
No,
But
I can jump in real quick. I did the math for the 2000 and it did come up to around $10. So I just wanted to, I was trying to verify that. I know there's been some other kind of numbers running around, but for that, I think part of our approach is to partner with the county and some of our nonprofits who've been doing this work around the congregate shelter. Of course, we all have talked about different sites that the city and the county own, or even the state to partner to do that, but that's all been at the conversation place. I know that one of the sites that we are working on bringing online in March is in Flowing Wells, and we have are looking into acquiring new properties, and if not, just looking at existing properties that we can do some of that work.
Okay,
if I could interject real quick here, Joe. I think one of the big sentiments is why 65 policing, 35 everything else. Why not the other way around? I think is a general sentiment that I'm getting from the chat room. They'd kind of like that answered. What was the decision matrix that caused that outcome?
Yeah, and that's a fair question. And I think, like the mayor mentioned earlier, is that these capital projects are very expensive when it comes to buildings, stations, vehicles, technology. They are expensive. And so we're investing in them now. And I know part of my commitment is in creating either more currently some breathing room with our general fund so we can continue to have more flexibility in investing in some of these other programs that we want to see, but that in 10 years from now, when we're talking about, hey, like, what does this proposition look like? Are we going to continue it? That we could have a very different math so that the investment is flipped. Before that, like I mentioned earlier, we need to bring community along on why that's important for that investment to be flipped. We need to have electeds in office who are bought in to that vision as well. But I think at this current moment is not, it's being preemptive of the current needs, but that we should be planning for the future needs. And I think part of this mayor and council is trying to find that balance, but I'm absolutely on board as we have future conversations for that investment to look differently.
Mayor?
If I may, I just want to say absolutely 1,000% what Vice Mayor said about the investments. These are based on the needs that we have. Besides the regular budget process, we have a capital needs budget, and that capital needs budget was at about $1 billion in terms of the capital needs that we have as a community. That includes vehicles, that includes buildings, that includes technology. And in this day and age, the technology is super important because we have to prevent cyber attacks as well. If there's a cyber attack on our emergency systems, it really could create horrible chaos within the city. So that is something that we have to think about. The other question that was asked about locations, thanks to the Biden-Harris administration and their American Rescue Plan Act, we received millions of dollars. And our priority as a mayor and council was to purchase property either for housing first or future affordable housing projects. We've owned some pieces of property as a city. I would say the bump steer is a perfect example of a property that we purchased to build affordability. Amazon Flats, we just celebrated today. There's 30 additional studio apartments that are going to be built in the next 6 months, and the possibility of 50 future affordable housing apartments at the Amazon. We purchased the Wildcat Inn. We purchased many properties so that we could provide affordable housing and housing first options for our community.
April, I see that you had a response to some of those questions.
No, I just, something Mayor Romero said made me have a question, but now I'm questioning whether or not I have rights to ask questions. So.
Of course you do. Go ahead.
Which line item in this tax is gonna support prevention against cyber attacks?
It's the technology for 911, 311. And there's a line item that provides technology for 311, 911 systems. And they haven't been invested in the last 20 years. So
is it PSCD technology at 4.13 million annually?
Yes.
4.13 to protect against cyber attacks annually.
Well, to provide the services and to upgrade the systems.
Okay, and that's in addition to the other two items for 911 and 311 operator staffing.
Yeah, that's staffing.
Okay.
Okay.
Joe, let's have another question from the chat and then go to one of the live questions.
Okay, just a clarification. Does the city have any progressive measures for raising resources?
In other words,
The only
tax that would be
one,
more
the only
progressive.
one that is allowed by state law for cities to be able to tap into are sales taxes. We have a very minuscule secondary property tax. Pima County is allowed to charge property taxes, and it's their primary property tax that we all pay into every year. Secondary property taxes are allowed for cities and towns in Arizona for the purposes of general obligation bonds, but they're very, very tiny compared to the ability of Pima County to be able to go out for general obligation bonds because they have the capacity to be able to use property taxes.
Jean, you have a question you want?
And then
I
just was gonna add to that. Then there's like small fees, right? That the city also has, like the rental, bed tax or utility tax, like things that generate very small dollars for the city
and aren't necessarily all that much more progressive.
Yeah.
I'm also looking in a message in chat that says an option for non-regressive taxation is to tax investors. There are thousands of daily stock transactions within the city of Tucson jurisdiction. And looking at the charter, I believe city of Tucson has business privilege tax. So potentially not taxing.
Business privilege tax is sales tax.
Sales tax. Yeah,
Business privilege tax is sales tax. Yeah, I mean, we do have departments that pay for themselves. For example, Tucson Water, the ratepayers pay for their water and, the services, and Tucson Water pays for itself. The other department that pays for itself, it doesn't always, pay for itself, is the environmental services, which is our recycling and brush and bulky and trash services in the city.
Yeah.
The other one is golf, and that had not been paying for itself for decades.
Yeah.
When I became council member,
Yeah.
I ruffled a lot of feathers to make sure that that golf paid for itself.
Yeah. So far as I know, the Tucson does not have a stock exchange, so it would not be feasible to tax stock transactions in Tucson. I'm going to ask Gene to ask a question. Go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question, Gene.
Yeah, thank you guys for hosting this. Thank you for having this event. One of the reasons why I'm voting no on this, and I'm curious how Mayor Romero and Councilmember Santa Cruz will respond, is I'm really concerned about TBD and the civil rights record of police departments with some of these technologies. Karen Ulick's newsletter noted that all city vehicles will have cameras that will be recording constantly and sending footage to CSARC. I posted a report in chat that maybe people would be curious to look at of TBD in 2020 monitoring and spying on teenage activists, teenagers as young as 15, protesting police brutality. And I'm concerned, like with the Trump administration, who has access to these technologies, and like we're just ignoring the ACLU and the recommendations against mass surveillance. And that starts here in Tucson. There's a lot of money to go towards that. So
yeah, I hear you. And April actually raised this.
April
actually raised this concern earlier in the panel. But yeah, do you have additional responses to that, Regina or Elaine?
I would say that body-worn cameras is something that we've been using for the last 6 years, and it really actually helps protect both the community and the city of Tucson, frankly. And so we already use body-worn cameras to protect community. And so it's cameras, vehicle cameras have existed not just in the city of Tucson, but throughout the country. And those cameras are used again to protect the community and to protect the officers that are using them. So it is something, it is again, technology that is already in use and is expensive to maintain and replace. And frankly, we have been able to investigate incidents in our community based on those body-worn cameras and car cameras, to be able to look at what really happened in certain situations.
Lane, you have anything to add?
I would just add that it's also, so there's, that side of it, but the other one is continuing to protect, community members being able to also film interactions as another point of reference, because you see one perspective on a body-worn camera than you see from the other side. So I think that's why it's important for us to continue to protect those rights of the community.
April?
Oh, yeah. I agree that the ACLU has found that cameras and that type of surveillance has not been proven effective at either preventing attacks or at petty crime reduction or reducing fear of crime either. So there's no actual evidence to support that, according to the ACLU. What they did find is that cameras are susceptible to abuse, right? So we may feel we have confidence in the way that they will be used by the individuals in law enforcement, but law enforcement are people and they will abuse just as other people abuse. They will abuse it criminally. ACLU found institutional abuse, disproportionate targeting of people of color has been found by the ACLU. These types of cameras have been used for voyeurism. There's a lack of limits or controls on the way that these cameras and the footage can be used additionally. And there's basically what they found was there's disproportionate benefit to risk for this type of widespread camera surveillance. And it would be an interesting question to see what exactly, how exactly supposedly these cameras that already exist have kept people safe when there's data pointing that it's negligible published by the ACLU. I think that's...
I don't think body-worn cameras keep people safe or prevent crime. That is not what they're intended for. It's a recording of an incident as it takes place. And that is something then that people, if there's wrongdoing, that can be used in court to make a case. It's not going to prevent or stop crime or minimize a behavior in any shape or form, but it is material that can be used if needed in court.
Right. So the worry is that that can be used in court, but when accountability systems are not in place for police violence, it doesn't help protect the people from
Well,
that
and I
police
would
violence.
jump in and say that in my experience as mayor, because of body-worn cameras, we were able to, let's just use as an example, the Carlos Adrian and Grim Lopez case, the death that happened of a person that was going through crisis induced by drugs. And because of the Carlos Adrian and Gren Lopez, very, very specifically to what April just said, being able for me as a policymaker and elected official, that was a point, a turning point in my very early career as mayor, by the way, because it happened in, I think it must have been May, June of 2020. I had been a mayor for 6 months. And that is the case where I can point at that as policymakers, we can use those incidents to change policy. And that is where I decided, along with my thinking from my colleagues on the council, very specifically Vice Mayor Santa Cruz, about really creating the community safety, health and wellness program. That program was created with trying to divert emergency calls, such as the one that Carlos Adrian's grandmother made to 911, to be able to send specialists and to be able to have clinical psychologists at 911 is something that we added. Create community care coordinators, create follow-up programs, to wrap around services to community, that is going through crisis. And so not every 911 call deserves, or we should be sending a police officer or a firefighter to. That's very specifically, right? You want to talk about accountability. That is something that mayor and council and policymakers do. And because of that footage and that video, we at the mayor and council level were able to create accountability and create programming and programs that are helping our community in crisis.
That was a horrific case. I remember it well. Just to follow up on Jean's question, can we be assured that these funds are not going to be used for new surveillance technology, such as high-speed police cruiser cameras for license plate readers, or gunshot locators, or any other of the technologies that are out there that we in Tucson have not yet implemented?
We are going to have, and this is something else that that people that are putting out misinformation in our community, they're saying two things. One, that the money is going to be used for something else that is absolutely illegal to do. There's something that's called a truth in taxation. It is approved by voters at the same time, and that truth in taxation basically is telling voters this money is going to be used for what we're telling you it's going to be used for. By law, we have to use it for what voters approved it for. We're creating an oversight commission of citizen volunteers that will sit on the oversight commission and make sure that every penny that is spent for what we told voters is going to be spent for. And so, those oversight commission meetings are usually follow open meeting law. Community can go, they have call to the audience. it's a very open and transparent process that people can continue participating in.
Great. More questions from the chat, Joe?
Boy, are there.
Can I just mention something?
Sure, go ahead, April.
Do you know what the outcome of that was for justice for Adrian Ingram Lopez? Did the cameras help him get justice from his attackers in the police department?
So April, I'm sure you know that we don't get to decide on that. That went to the county attorney, and then that county attorney, which at the time was Barbara Love-Wall, who had a very different take on the situation, made a judgment. So we did our part. You know, we denounced the actions of the police officer. We mourned with the family. We went to the march and protested. But that is what we can do. We're not the governing body in charge of prosecuting in these kinds of situations.
Right. It's just to say
we're getting a little bit off track of the Prop 414 and going off into this. I'm interested in if we use that money for additional surveillance technology.
Right.
But again, this is a whole different discussion, really. So I'm going to steer us back on course a little bit.
There's there's $4 million a year for this, for body-worn cameras in Prop 414. And if the argument is that having this camera footage on police increases police accountability or keeps the community safe, that's very relevant in my opinion, because if people are going to be voting for this thinking that officers wearing cameras allows for them to be held accountable, there's a lot of evidence against that.
That's a very good point and valid point, April. I'm just saying this specific case is not really, is really tangential. Joe, any more questions from the audience in the chat?
Yeah, there are a lot of great questions. And how are we doing on time?
We're good. We have about another 15 minutes, and however long the panelists want to stay and have interest to actually respond to the questions is really our only limit.
Okay, great. How can the public see in advance the specific allocation of funds for a given line item? There are so many line items allocated in each of the 5 main areas as provided in the pamphlet mailed to households. Incidentally, at least one apartment renter I know has not received their pamphlet. And Mary, do you have anything on that?
Yeah, any registered voter received the informational pamphlet, and it has all of the language available to voters. There's a few ways that you can get that pamphlet if you didn't receive it for one reason or the other. Make sure that you're registered to vote. If you're not, if you moved for whatever reason, but you can go to tucsonaz.gov and navigate our website. And I think it's tucsonaz.gov/Prop 414 that has information about the initiative and explains the investment lines. So it has, everything is online. Also, there's printed copies throughout the city of Tucson. I know that I have a box full and I'm putting it out at the mayor's office. I know the ward offices have that informational pamphlet, as well as Parks and Recreation offices or Parks and Recreation centers in the community have those as well. So there's different ways of getting that informational pamphlet.
Okay, we did have another.
I think April had a brief response to this.
Yeah. I just wanted to add that the voter registration deadline was yesterday, and additionally, that site was down last night. So, just hopefully, you made it under the wire.
Yeah.
Okay. We have one of our participants that $10 is a number that a family would have to pay for this particular tax. He believes it's low. Utilities are taxed. Businesses will be taxed on their goods. That will be passed on to the consumer, making prices higher, and then paying 9.2% on the final transaction. For a family, it gets expensive. Is that a pretty fair summary?
nobody responding to that one. I can just say that, yeah, any of that sales tax that falls upon local business would likely be passed on to the consumer in terms of higher prices. So there may be additional costs to consumers as a result. Let's get a live question from Kurt. I'm going to ask Kurt to unmute and ask his question.
Hi, thank you, Mayor Romero and Vice Mayor Santa Cruz. I think you both did a pretty good job. I was kind of more in opposition to it before hearing you speak. Question is really about the Tucson Police Department's budget for 2025 and kind of going forward. They're currently at $227 million, which is 1.7 times the size of Tucson Fire, which is the second largest department. Tucson Police is currently about 30% of the total budget, which is about the size of the 16 smallest departments. And I'm just kind of curious, within the sort of scope, let's say just in the near future, or maybe even just your aspirational goals, is there at any point, floating the idea of reducing the police budget, making it as the size of the 15 smallest police departments? What is it going to take in order to reduce the budget? Is there anything that can happen, or is it just going to increase forever?
What I can say is that police department is not just police officers, right? It's the expenses, like we said, of capital improvements, of equipment in order to be able to provide safety in our community. And a lot of people don't count that as part of the police budget. We include their retirement system and PSPRS, which is the police and first responder retirement system, costs the city of Tucson about $100 million of investment per year. And so part of the police department budget includes the investment in their retirement systems. I'm a true union believer. I believe in retirement systems versus 401k. Regular Tucson employees have retirement systems as well. It's the TSRS. And even though they are expensive, it is investing in people that in working families that serve our communities. So that's part of the expenses that city of Tucson has to carry as part of both police and fire and other departments that the city of Tucson has. I believe in the programs that we created. Community Safety, Health, and Wellness is a program that we created because we wanted to divert and use different programs to serve our community when it came to safety. And so I believe in investing in community safety, health, and wellness. I believe in investing in youth employment. This initiative has preventative investments. So it's not just about attending to crime and emergencies in our community. It's about preventing and investing on the front end, right? It has $1 million a year for preschool investment. It has $1 million a year for youth employment, another $1 million a year for workforce development. And it has investments for community safety, health, and wellness. It has investments for affordable housing, which is something that stabilizes families. And there's research behind all of this, right? Mayor and council and the Board of Supervisors voted on unanimously. I think the Board of Supervisors, not unanimously, but with the mayor and council, we did, on working on the Prosperity Initiative. And a lot of these programs that we've created and want to continue investing in tie back to the Prosperity Initiative to cut the cycles of poverty and layer investments in the most vulnerable communities in our city. So those are the investments that I want to be able to continue investing in. And there's huge question marks about whether we can continue doing that work with the political reality that we're living in, right? The state legislature is controlled by Republicans, and all three branches of the federal government are controlled by Republicans, and they're coming fast and furiously for programs that that help the most vulnerable amongst us. So, you know, we need to make sure that we are investing in ourselves, that we're proving, as the vice mayor said before, that we're proving that these programs work. And one of the reasons that we chose a 10-year investment is that we want to make sure that we are investing in it, getting metrics of our success, and making sure that we have enough time to be able to, within the next 5 years, the next 10 years, continue expanding prevention programs and investments in breaking cycles of poverty.
April, you had a response to that?
Yeah, to Kurt's point, and also building on what Mayor Romero said, a lot of that general funding for the police department does cover pensions, right? Is my understanding, is what Mayor Romero was saying. So when it comes to Prop 414, we have funding for 40 additional officers and 40 plus 40 additional CSOs. So presumably this will add to the policing need in the general fund budget after this tax sunsets, if it wins on the ballot, right? Because then we'll have more careers we then need to continue supporting throughout those careers, and the pensions. So adding personnel that will be funded by this tax will only make a larger ask of the general fund for TPD's budget going forward. It is my opinion that if this passes, we will not be seeing more room in the general fund for other things, starved departments like HCD, whose workers came out to mayor and council public hearing requesting fair pay the other night in force as a union. So no, I mean, I would not recommend to hold out hope for a lessened general fund police budgeting if we're using this tax to add more personnel.
Vice Mayor Santa Cruz?
Yeah, I mean, I guess just to April's point, adding 40 officers is a drop in the bucket when you're talking about the city of Tucson with over close to 600,000 residents and a huge area of land to patrol. And that number comes from just seeing the needs in certain areas of where instead of paying people overtime, which costs us more money, having to pay police officers overtime pay than hiring somebody to do that work. So just to respond to that, I think the other piece, just going back to the earlier question, is back in 2020, around the time that we brought on Chief Casmar, we would go on bike rides to talk about the state of policing, the state of our community, a lot of the really difficult conversations we were all having here in the city of Tucson. And one of the things that I shared with him was that I really appreciated the model of our Southern Arizona Community Food Bank, that they went from just their primary goal being serving people in crisis with food boxes to thinking, how do we get ourselves out of business? Like, how do we create an ecosystem where community food banks no longer have to exist because people have their needs are being met. And part of that work was they were part of the Fight for 15, the minimum wage here in the city, of making sure that people have living wages to be able to buy food and take care of themselves. I see our work, if we want to think of a world where we don't need policing, like policing right now only responds to crisis, that we need to build that ecosystem where from housing, from early childhood education, from childcare, from families healing from generational trauma, mental health services, healthcare. It's this entire ecosystem that needs to exist that will over time replace the need for more policing. I think right now what we're seeing is like more of a burden on already very fragile systems, safety nets in place. And that part of this mayor and council's goal has been like, how do we help stabilize and really lay out the groundwork to meet the current need and then moving on to the future. And we can't do that alone. Like, it's not just the responsibility of mayor and council when it comes to budgeting, it's how we engage with each other, with our neighbors. Do we talk to our neighbors? Do we know who our neighbors are? Do we show up for them when they're in crisis? Or do we call the police? If there's a different person walking around the street, do we befriend them? Do we say hi to them? Or are we suspicious about them? There is so much in the fabric of our community that needs to shift for us to get to that place. And that starts with all of us, and not just coming to mayor and council and telling them that the police needs to be defunded.
Thank you, Lane. Respecting everybody's time, I note that it is 8 o'clock. If anybody has a hard out, I certainly respect that. We can have one more question, I think, live here from Ethan, if anybody is able to respond to that. Then we'll say goodnight for the evening. Ethan, what's your question?
Hey, yeah, thank you. So in regards to the CSO and the PSIs, I think I really agree that they are offering a lot to the community. And looking at the breakdown for the funding, it looks like the goal of Prop 414 is to add 40 additional CSO and PSIs, and also 40 more sworn staff members.
Mm-hmm.
It looks like the cost for the sworn staffing is almost double, or over double, despite it being the same amount of people being brought on. Along with that, I was just wondering why, if we're seeing such good results from the CSOs and like there's a lot of good community reception from that, why aren't we prioritizing that over adding like additional sworn officers? Thank you.
One of the ways that mayor and council, and to be honest with you, as I said at the beginning, when I was elected mayor in November of 2019, we had 5 CSOs, and CSOs is community service officers, and PSIs are professional staff investigators. One of the things that we wanted to do was expand community service officers. They don't carry a gun, and they usually go to neighborhood association meetings. They do a lot of community engagement. And yes, absolutely. Other staff, including regular staff members in the city of Tucson, are less expensive than police officers. So that's why when we hired Chief Casmar, the conversations, as the vice mayor said, that we were having with him is to be able to really try and look at community safety, at public safety differently. And community service officers, as well as professional staff investigators, are part of redistributing what every person does, not just in TPD, but outside of TPD, and redistributing the workload to the most appropriate. So we have a saying that we put the right work in the right hands. That's why it was important for us to expand community service officers. Professional staff investigators don't have to be sworn officers. Regular staff members within TPD that do investigative work. And so it really is about putting the right work in the right hands. When someone calls 911 and it is not an emergency call, one of the reasons that I advocated for creating 311 is so that non-emergency calls could go to 311 and we could have much more time with people that needed some other type of help. And so it really is about reimagining community safety in our city and putting the right work in the right hands. And so it really is less expensive to hire community service officers, professional staff investigators, care coordinators, housing navigators, we're putting the right work in the right hands and helping people create safety for whatever it is that they need. Whatever they call the city of Tucson on, we want to make sure that we're hiring the appropriate people to take some of that. Beforehand, for many generations, people call 911 and they would expect a firefighter or a police officer to show up. Nowadays, within the city of Tucson, it's different. It's a different model. And we want to be able to continue growing that safety model.
Anyone else have a response that they want to give to Ethan? All right, seeing none, I'm going to thank everybody for their participation. Thank you to our panelists. Thanks for showing up, and thanks for your insight and your detailed explanations. I really appreciate it. Thank you for joining us to all our audience members. This video recording will be available on YouTube at the DGT's Democrats of Greater Tucson's YouTube channel. And I'll be providing transcripts and chat logs and contact information for anybody to our public officials and to April if there are follow-up questions that they feel they want to get to. So thanks to everybody for joining us, and have a great night from Democrats of Greater Tucson. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Wayne,